There are 500 new diabetics diagnosed every day in Australia. And I don't think the US is very much different. In fact, there's hardly a home that's not affected. And what's our $1 million question? Why? Because remember, Newton's third law of motion states that to every action, there's an equal and an opposite reaction. There's always a reason. And there certainly are some reasons, and I'm going to be addressing those tonight. One of them is the way people are eating today. Carbohydrates have become a very large part in the daily diet. So carbohydrates, we'll do an assessment, cereal and bread. There's a whole aisle devoted to bread. There's a whole aisle devoted to cereal. Cakes, biscuits, donuts, cookies, muffins, croissants, pasties, pies, so we'll just say etc. Otherwise, we'll fill the whole board. Pizza's become also an irregular food, as is pasta. I don't think there's a home today that doesn't have pasta. Rice is another carbohydrate, as is potatoes. And last, and certainly least in nutritive value, is the pure crystallized acid extracted from the sugarcane plant. Would you agree with me? Absolutely. And I don't think anyone chose to eat this way. It's just there. It's just handy. We've got such a fast society. People are reaching for the quicks. Isn't that true? All of these break down in the body to a singular structure called glucose. And as glucose, that gets taken into the body, number one, it goes to the cell. So let's have a look at our cell, which we know very well now. The glucose goes in, and it goes in under the action of insulin. Insulin's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell. And when it gets into the cell, it goes through a 20-step pathway that delivers 2 units of energy. The end result is the chemical form of glucose called pyruvate, and pyruvate gets fed into the 8-step pathway called the powerhouse of the cell because it delivers a very impressive 36 units of energy. What makes the difference is oxygen. This pathway, no oxygen. But only so much can be put through the energy pathways. Some has to be stored, and it's stored as glycogen. Glycogen is a name given to quick-release glucose stores. They're like a little bunch of grapes, little molecules of glucose just sitting especially in our muscle cell. If it's in our muscle cell, it's almost like it's in a prison. It can only be used by our muscle cell. But on this high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over, so only so much can be stored as glycogen. And so now the body stores the excess as fat. And we see in Australia, in America, people are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I was at Walmart last week, and you go through the aisles and there's these sections in the middle and it's just cakes, 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 these white cakes with pink and green icing. Huge carbohydrate consumers. And this is a big contributing factor to diabetes. And there's no doubt about it that there was no diabetes on the planet till sugar was well refined. But something else has come in that's increased the diabetic problem today, and that is wheat. So what's the matter with wheat? Well, it was hybridized in the 1950s, and it was hybridized to produce a plant with a high yield of grain. And Dr. Norman Bullag and his team of scientists certainly created a plant with a high yield of grain. In fact, sometimes it's up to 6 to 8 times more grain per plant. What's that? 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. The farmer's got to pay his bills. So this wheat It went worldwide in the late 70s. In fact, Dr. Norman Bulag, I think he got his Nobel Prize in 1976. So 1977, 78, this wheat's going worldwide. So by the 1990s, every cereal, bread, and of course all the cakes we mentioned, pizza, pasta, it's all made out of the hybridized wheat. And that's where the problem arises. You see, it was put through intensive crossbreeding to produce a smaller plant with a thicker stem so it could hold the grain. And it was rushed through with no safety studies. And only now are we starting to see the problems. So what I'd like to show you is what it did to the starch structure. So the starch structure that was created in the hybridization of the wheat is called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A, it gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast. And so you've got a corresponding dump, as you always do with a high blood sugar. Amylopectin B, as a comparison, is found in bananas and potatoes. And if you're familiar with the glycemic index of foods, bananas and potatoes, they get it up relatively high, relatively fast. Say like this, not as high, not as fast, not as low. That's your B. Amylopectin C is found in all your beans, your legumes, so chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, lentils. Amylopectin C, it gives a nice steady rise, nice steady maintenance, nice steady drop. What does every cell in our body want? It wants this steady rise, this steady, consistent delivery of fuel. And what it not only feeds our cells, not only our brain cells, but also it takes a weight off the pancreas. Pancreases are wearing out because it's getting screamed up, oh no, we're too high. And when the blood sugar level goes too high, then the pancreas releases insulin, because insulin gets the blood sugar level down. And when it goes too low, then the pancreas stops the insulin and releases glucagon. And glucagon, that's the hormone that gets the blood sugar level up again. So these two hormones work together to balance blood glucose levels. And most of the time, we don't even think about it. I don't ever think about it. Everything just stays the same. But when we're eating foods with that create these high blood sugar levels, and how many of these are a combination of wheat and sugar? Cereal, bread, cakes, all the cake section. They're a combination of both. Now notice the explosion of diabetes began around the 90s. And it's around the 90s that the full effect of this hybridized wheat happened. So let me show you where it sits on the glycemic index. So the glycemic index is an index of how quickly the glucose in the food is released into the blood. So baseline sits at about 55. So let me show you some lows. Cherries, all your berries actually, sit about 26, and that's why your blackberries, your blueberries, strawberries, cherries, they're great fruit for diabetics because they're low on the GI, low on the glycemic index, meaning they give a nice, steady, sure delivery of fuel. Grapefruit. Grapefruit sits at approximately 25. And that's not a surprise because it's not very sweet, is it? So let's go up and have a look at the highs. Sugar, whether it's white or tan or brown, sits at 59, and that's no surprise. But what is a surprise is that white wheat products, so that would be white bread, white pasta, they're sitting at 69. Yeah. Why? It's because of the amylopectin A. It's that starch that was created in the hybridization process. Remember, it was rushed through with no safety studies because I thought, oh, we don't have to do safety studies, it's just wheat. I'm glad you're sitting down for the next one. Whole wheat. Whole wheat. Where does whole wheat sit? 72. How could this be? Well, because it's not refined, it has more amylopectin A in it. The refining of the wheat, creating the white bread, the white cakes, takes more of the amylopectin A out. And it's the amylopectin A that gets the blood sugar level up. I was explaining this in one lecture and a lady began to cry. I said, why are you crying? She said, I'm a diabetic. I'm 69. I was diagnosed at 65. I do everything they tell me. I have whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, whole wheat cakes, whole wheat. And she said, and every 6 months I go to the doctor and he puts me on more insulin. By the way, what's the definition of insanity? Now, I'm not criticizing this lady. She's just doing what she's told, but she said it's been so frustrating. She said, I don't do what the lady down the road does. She has cakes and croissants and candies and soda drinks. She said, I don't do that. And yet every 6 months I'm put on more insulin. She said, I'm also crying because you've solved the puzzle. It's the wheat. It's the wheat. And we've got another problem too, is that people are just overdoing the wheat. Cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, donuts, cookies, mid-morning, mid-afternoon. What's that? That's almost 100% wheat. So in the Garden of Eden, where in Genesis 1:29, God's telling Adam and Eve to eat, he didn't say, behold, I've given you wheat. He said, behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed. That's millet and buckwheat and quinoa and variety of grains and legumes and seeds, a variety. And I think you'll agree with me, variety in food is very nice. So one of the problems is the wheat. Another problem is just the overdoing of the wheat. So no wonder there has been such an explosion in diabetes. But what happens before diabetes on this high carbohydrate diet is that the glucose is high, so the insulin's high, and the cell eventually says, I'm sick of the sight of you. And so insulin resistance is set up. So with insulin resistance, the insulin's resisted, can't get the glucose in the cell, so the glucose remains in the blood. The brain sees it and screams at the pancreas, more insulin, more insulin. And so now, what are we going to do with the glucose now? It'll have to just come out in the urine. And diabetes mellitus means sweet urine. And because the pancreas is getting screamed at so much, it says, I'm not going to work anymore. I'm not getting treated properly. I'm done. I'm not making a distinction between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes because the same things help them all. So how can we turn this around? It's probably not a surprise to you to know that there are a few things that have got to stop. In the book, The Ministry of Healing, on about page 57, I think it is, the writer lists the true remedies. Let me list them for you. Number 1 true remedy is pure air. That's not a surprise. Oxygen is the most vital element needed for life. Did you try breathing only through your nose this morning? Not easy. Number 2 is sunshine. Our pancreas needs us to have adequate amounts of vitamin D because there are 2,500 receptor sites on the DNA for vitamin D. Number 3, there are some things that must stop. What must stop to conquer diabetes? Wheat. Now, I've got some good news. We're very jealous of you here in America because you got the most amazing bread. It's called Simple Needs. And Simple Needs is a bread that is gluten-free and it's sourdough. You can order it or you can get it at Whole Foods. You can get it at, I think Sprouts have it. And that's excellent bread for the diabetic. And a friend of mine owns the company. His name's Tristan. And he uses my sourdough starter that he got years ago. And the reason he developed this bread was because his first son quickly showed signs of severe allergies. And so he started to play with different grains. And he's now making 9,000 loaves a day in a busy season. And he's about to get contracts with many other stores. I think he said Target and different other stores. So it's a great story of a man and his wife and kids and their business. I like to support local industry. And he's in North Carolina, so his bread will go everywhere. His bread will keep in the fridge for 6 weeks. So that's pretty good. When you take it out, it'll be a bit heavy. Put it in the toaster and it goes light and fluffy again. So the wheat must stop and the refined sugar. Actually, if someone wants to conquer diabetes, all sugars have to stop. Even honey and maple syrup until the pancreas is happy. There is one sweet, and moderation is also important in this law. There's one sweetener that can be used that won't have a dramatic effect on your insulin levels, and that is stevia. And if someone says, I don't like stevia, I say, why? And they say, because it's bitter. And I say, you've used too much. So go very lightly. If it's not sweet enough, put a tiny bit more in because it's a very delicate sweetener and you only need the smallest little amount. Also caffeine. Caffeine causes a crisis response in the body, and whenever there's a crisis response, there's a rise in insulin to get the blood sugar level in, or get the glucose into the cell to prepare for the crisis. And so the caffeine must stop. Number 4, rest. There are certain hours in the night where the pancreas is reviving and recharging. And that specifically starts, well, you've just had daylight saving come in, summertime. So between 9 and 10 is a good time to retire. So let me give you God's perfect mathematical formula. 8 hours to work, 8 hours to play, 8 hours to sleep. 8 hours. 8 hours is not negotiable. One lady got very discouraged. She said, I don't sleep well and I'm finally sleeping at 5 hours sleep. I'm very happy. I said, well, I'd be happy too. But I said, work at it and soon you can sleep a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And I think we talk about sleep tomorrow. Sleep, is it? And chronic fatigue syndrome tomorrow evening. What's today? Thursday? Is it Wednesday? Okay, one day we're going to talk about it. Tomorrow, good. The pancreas, as is every organ of the body, needs to be revived. The next is exercise. Exercise plays a dramatic role in conquering diabetes. And one of the reasons is that what it does is it dramatically turns around insulin resistance very quickly. And we looked yesterday at the high intensity interval training. And the high intensity interval training are intervals of very high intensity and intervals of recovery. And in that high intensity time, you're actually giving a little bit of a shock to your body. And so the body adapts and adjusts to cope with these high levels, these intense sessions. And it needs the glucose coming into the cell, so it develops extra receptor sites on the membrane around the cell to get more glucose into the cell. So just drastically dropping the carbohydrates and increasing the exercise, you can get a turnaround in insulin resistance in a week. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? We live in an incredible body that has an inbuilt ability in it to heal it. It just needs the right conditions. So you just got to start with what you can, where you can. Depending on any ailments that you might have in the body, you've got to find out the exercise that works for you. You're the doctor there, but daily exercise. So let me tell you the story of Dan. Dan came and did our program, and he's a type 1 diabetic, and he's 19. So I put my detective hat on, and he developed diabetes at the age of 15 after a course of very strong antibiotics. The side effect of the antibiotics is that it killed off some of the beta cells in his pancreas. He said to me, "My doctor said that my pancreas is dead." I said, "Is it gangrene?" "What's dead?" "If there's blood going through that pancreas, it's alive." I said, "Well, I don't believe that." Do you know, that's what my husband says all the time. That's why he's a Christian, because he's the biggest skeptic. And it's the only thing that made sense. People say to him, "Michael, look at my blood results." He said, "Oh, I don't believe that." They said, "But Michael, they're the blood results." He said, "Yeah, but they could be wrong." Do you ever have that in your mind? And it's a good thing. It's not absolute. It's not absolute. I think a blood test can give a bit of an indication, but one always has to realise that it's an indication of what's happening to you right now. And in 2 weeks' time, with a total turnaround in your life, it actually could be a bit different. So what Dan did, he heard the lectures. He's a very quiet young man. He was with us for 4 weeks, 2 weeks program, 2 weeks helping in the garden. He was on 90 units of insulin a day. And the first few days, if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he would take a candy. And that would get it up, and it would get it up quick, and he'd always get a headache. After a few days, he felt a bit guilty. He thought he shouldn't be doing that. So he decided to eat an apple in the middle of the night if he got a blood sugar level low. It takes a while to eat an apple in the middle of the night, though. Do you know, coming into the 3rd week, after hearing the lectures, he decided to do 30 push-ups. If he had a blood sugar level low, he'd jump down on the floor, he'd do 30 push-ups. Blood sugar would come up. Where'd that come from? Glycogen stores. And if they're running out, fat stores. In fact, he said to me after this experiment he did, he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me about my glycogen stores?" He told me that one morning, I have to give you Australian levels. So Australian figures for blood sugar levels would be 5, 6. He woke up one morning and his blood sugar levels were 3. That's nearly passing out. So he had some Celtic salt, had a glass of water, got dressed, went to the bathroom, had another glass of water, put his joggers on and went high intensity up and down our hills, came back, tested his blood sugar levels, this is 20 minutes later, 9. And he'd had nothing to eat. But notice what he did too. He did 2 things. He drank water, and we find that the salt helps, the Celtic salt. And he'd run, which means the body said, we need fuel, release the glycogen stores. And remember yesterday we looked at how the human growth hormone can be released to release the fat stores. Our liver can convert those fat stores back to glucose if they need it. It's called gluconeogenesis. By the time Dan went home, he was on 10 units of insulin a day. This is type 1 diabetic. This was after 3 weeks he'd come from 90 down to 10. Why was he having a blood sugar low in the middle of the night? Because he was still on too much insulin. But I understand. He wanted to be cautious and come off it little by little. 90 units of insulin a day allowed him to live on this. But when we stopped the high carbohydrate, the high wheat, the high sugar foods, he didn't need it. Was his pancreas dead? No, it wasn't dead at all. He brought it back to life. How did he brought it back to life? He brought it back to life through these simple, often called laws of health. Dr. Jackson from America, he called them laws of life. Florence Nightingale, she called them the laws of nursing. And they're so simple one would almost bypass them. Number 6, proper diet. So what's the proper diet for a diabetic? What was Dan eating? Dan wanted to conquer this and he wanted to conquer it fast. So he made a choice to stop fruit. Not every diabetic has to stop fruit, as long as you go on the low GI. So let's have a look at what a breakfast might be. What would be a low GI breakfast? I'm going to give you breakfast number 1 and breakfast number 2. But as you'll see when looking at these, there's going to be quite a variety. Might be berries, a bowl of berries. Remember, berries is low GI. And maybe some chia or flax, ground flax over that. Maybe some nuts sprinkled on top. Maybe some millet porridge. Millet or brown rice porridge. Brown rice and millet are both fairly low on the GI. Maybe a nut milk. Maybe that's almond. Maybe it's coconut milk. Maybe it's an organic soy. So looking at our 3 essentials that we looked at this morning, fibre is one essential. Plenty of fibre there. Protein, where's the protein? The protein is in the nuts, the flax, the chia, and also some in the grain. Fat, where's our fats? Our fats are in our little bit in the milk, some in the nuts, some in the flax and the chia, so we get a tick. We've got our 3 essentials. And a breakfast like that will give a steady, sure release of glucose, no quick highs and lows. What's another breakfast? Maybe a grapefruit. And if someone doesn't like grapefruit, they might prefer to have some tomato, avocado. Avocado, maybe on some simple needs bread. The simple needs is all low glycemic grains. And then they might have scrambled tofu. Scrambled tofu on that. Or they might like some lentils or some black beans or something like that. And then some nuts. Again, lots of fibre. Protein in the nuts, the scrambled tofu, and also in the bread. Fats, good fats in the avocado, in the tofu, on the nuts. Some people will avoid tofu. Tofu is only a problem if it's been genetically modified and grown with chemicals. God made tofu and he made the soybean, and he made it an excellent bean. Some of the highest anti-cancer properties of any food. A friend of mine did a thesis on the soybean, and people say to her, "Tell us the story on the soybean." She said, "It's really easy. God made it good and man mucked it up." So what about lunch? And remember the time-restricted eating? We looked at that this morning, and the time-restricted eating is finding that it's helping with the blood sugar levels. In fact, it's more effective than eating every 2 hours. Because as you saw this morning, we went on our journey through the gut. When you eat every 2 hours, you greatly impair digestion. You slow it down, you interfere with it. Remember Michael trying to do a 2-hour job and everyone interrupts, and it's the end of the day and the job's not done. That's what happens with digestion when you keep interrupting. So let's have a look at a lunch. Salad. Salad could be anything you love. It might be lettuce, it might be cabbage. Put some avocado, grated carrot, olives, vegetables. That could be baked or stir-fried or steamed. Can we have potatoes? They're high in the glycemic index. Well, my husband, I think he'd die if he couldn't have potatoes. But he's not a diabetic. But even a diabetic, they could have potato as long as they have a little bit, just not a whole plate. But what's lower on the glycemic index is sweet potato or yam. Now you look at a potato, you look at a sweet potato, and you can't see much difference. So why is the potato high and the sweet potato low? Well, under a microscope, the fibre structure in the potato is very loose, so it releases the glucose quickly. But the fibre structure on the sweet potato is tight, so it slowly releases the glucose. Same with comparing a banana and cherries. On the cherries, it's a tight structure, and on the banana, it's loose. So if you love banana and you're a diabetic, just go really light, maybe a couple of slices of your husband's banana, but not a whole banana because it is high on the glycemic index. So vegetable baked, steamed or stir-fried, and protein. So protein might be a bean dish, it might be ground up nuts and breadcrumbs maybe to make little patties or a loaf, or it might be a tofu dish. Tofu is a tasteless sponge. You just got to do something to it. So we marinate it, which makes it taste nice. And always end in a few nuts. That's a nice dessert, a handful of nuts. So there, in what I just described to you, there's quite a few lunches there. And in the back of my book, Self-Heal by Design, you'll find several legume recipes, because I find that that's what most people don't know how to cook or how to make them taste amazing. And God gave us taste buds for a reason. Food should taste very good. So there are some illustrations of meals. What about in the evening? Some people eat 2 meals a day. It might be 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. But others, because they have to get to work early, they have to have breakfast early, so they might have lunch at midday, 12:30, and then they'll need something at night. So the ladies have been giving a nice illustration of a light evening meal here. So it's just a little bit, not a lot. So it might be soup. It might be a salad. It might be a smoothie. So there's a variety of things that might be at night. Number 7 is use of water. And what we find is that having that little bit of salt and water between meals helps to maintain blood sugar levels. So it was about 2 years ago, I was at a camp meeting with my daughter here in the US, and a lady and a man came up and they said, we've got 3 children and our 7-year-old girl is a diabetic. And often when I investigate children who are diabetic, sometimes there's a link with the vaccines. Sometimes there's a genetic link because maybe the parents ate a lot of sugar. So there can be a few factors coming together. But I find no matter what the cause, every diabetic responds to this. And they told me what she's eating and it all sounded good. They were not aware of the dangers of wheat, and that really surprised them. But again, you've got a great option in the simple needs. Or you could get sourdough spelt bread, spelt, Enkenhorn, kamut. They are all wild hybrids of the original wheat. They have not been hybridized. So those grains should be okay for the diabetic because they haven't got that amylopectin A in it, often called ancient grains. They said that her blood sugar levels go low, so we give her a little snack, and then all the other kids want a little snack, and we've never given our kids snacks between meals because they don't eat properly at the next meal if they've had snacks. And I said, I understand your predicament. I said, try a little Celtic salt, and not a whole glass of water, a little Celtic salt, and for a 7-year-old, even a third of a glass of water. And then 5, 7, 10 minutes later, another third of a glass of water. So spread the water out. They came running to me the next day and they said, it's working. That little bit of salt and easing the water is maintaining her blood sugar levels. So that's good news. So it's not just the water, it's also the whole salt. The whole salt with its 82, or some of them they claim have 84 minerals in it, helps to balance blood glucose levels. So how much water should a child have? So here's a good rule of thumb. So 50 pounds of body weight to 1 quart. A lady came to me and she was 200 pounds. She said, I don't even drink 3 glasses of water a day. How am I going to get up to? And I said, well, just start where you are. That's all you do. Rome wasn't built in a day. It's like sleep. If you're not sleeping 8 hours a night, try and sleep a little bit more every night, every night, every night. And eventually you can train yourself back into it. Remember when Emma said she's going to grow up in a minute? She didn't grow up in a minute. It takes a while, little by little by little. And the last law is trust in divine power. Stress plays a contributing role in all disease. I don't think stress causes diabetes, but it can be a contributing factor. And I maintain that in a well-slept, well-exercised, well-watered, well-fed body, a body that's not being overrun with the stimulants, that body copes with stress. So even when someone is suffering from anxiety, if someone's suffering from depression, you know where we start? We always start here. Because the writer states that these are the true remedies, and I believe it to be so. And they are so simple, almost so insignificant that one would think, how could they make a difference? But they do. So let me give you another story, and this story is a remarkable story because this man was 62. Because one might look at Dan and say, well, he's 19, he's young. His pancreas will revive because he's young. But Dan was 62. Dan was also classified as a type 1 diabetic. And, sorry, Dan was the young man. We'll call this guy Bob. So Bob was 62. He was diagnosed as type 1. And he was on blood pressure medication. He was on statin medication, blood thinners, and 90 units of insulin a day as well. And when he came to our retreat, he said, I won't be able to walk because my legs are swollen. His legs were swollen because recently the doctor had taken his lymph nodes out to try and discover what was contributing to his diabetes. So every time he got on a plane, his legs would swell. So we got him on the rebounder 1 minute every hour, just this. This is called the health bounce. So when you get a rebounder, it doesn't mean you have to leap immediately. Start like this. Listen to your knees, listen to your spine, and just as your body accepts it, you can start to do a little bit more. We got him to walk barefoot on the grass to massage the bottom of those feet. Within 24 hours, the legs had gone down by easily half. He was very excited about that. So Monday, Tuesday at the retreat, he was on juices. Blood sugar levels were balancing out very nicely. We had to give him a protein drink every evening because his blood sugar levels kept going too low, again, because he was on too much insulin. 90 units of insulin a day. Remember what it allowed him to do? Eat this. But he was starting to lose feeling in his feet. He thought he was going to have to retire. He was carrying probably, now I've got to put this from kilos to pounds, he was carrying probably about 50-pound excess weight. At the end of 2 weeks in the retreat, he stood up and he said, I'm taking 10 units of insulin a day. Type 1 diabetic. Incredible. Now, he said to me, anything you tell me to do, I will do. And he did. He did. He emailed me. Well, you think that's good? Wait till you hear this. He emailed me 3 months later. He said, I am off all my medication. All. In fact, you know what he said to me? You're going to be telling my story. And I do. He said, I went back to my specialist, and by the way, he's a fairly wealthy man, so he had the best specialists in the town. He said they're astonished. They'd actually sent him home before he came to the retreat and told him they can do no more for him. I said, tell me what you're eating, Bob. And basically, he eats what I just showed you. He said, I eat 2 meals a day, that's all. He said, I cycle 6 miles a day. I swim 30 laps of the pool. I'm on the rebounder 3 times a day. He said, and I drink all my water. He said, I don't have alcohol or caffeine anymore. Now, after 3 months, he said to me he'd lost, I think it was 25 pounds. Now, when he went home, his wife, he was 62, his wife was 42. She said, this is your baby. I like my champagne and my croissant. After 3 months, she's looking at her husband. And you know what she noticed? He doesn't get cranky anymore. See, when the blood sugar level goes up too high, then it dumps too low. That's when they bite your head off, when the blood sugar levels are right down there, because our brain can only hold a 2-minute supply of glucose. So once the blood sugar levels go down, in 2 minutes, they're going to be biting your head off. That's one sign that the blood sugar level's gone too low, because the brain feels it first. He said, my blood sugar's normal, my blood pressure's normal, my cholesterol's normal. He said, everything is normal. And he said, and I've gone back to full-time work. After 3 months, his wife became interested. She had a new husband. Do you know what they did? They remarried because life was so different. She came on board. Nothing he said convinced her. What convinced her? His life. And that is the most powerful thing you can do, is just to illustrate it in your life. Don't go home and beat your family over the head with health. They're expecting it. Go home and live the life and be a testament as to what this can do. Anyway, I got another email about 6 weeks later. He said, my wife's very happy. He said she's lost 12 pounds now, and all her girlfriends are saying, what are you doing? She's buying new outfits. Not too much, because I think there's more to lose. In fact, as you can see, it is so simple. So when I read that these are the true remedies, I have seen it again and again and again. And people say, so many success stories. Have you got any failed stories? I said, the only failure is the failure on the part of the person to do what you've got to do. And is that a very expensive program? No, it's not expensive at all. So if ever you see on Facebook, Barbara O'Neill is selling a product, you know it's not Barbara O'Neill, because this is what I teach. Lifestyle. And the lifestyle is the most powerful.